Okay, recording.
Okay, super. Well, I'd like to start, given that it's Veterans Day, and I know we've already had a number of honoring today. And it's interesting, I was thinking about it, and I have kids who are like 27, 32, that age range. One of the things I was talking about today is I think sometimes people trash New Canaan, this wealthy town. And my kids have an amazing number of their friends who've gone into service. I know one kid's a helicopter pilot in upstate New York. Another one is a tank commander in South Korea. A couple are infantry. A couple of them went to the point. But I think it's just amazing, my one little vantage point, looking around at, my kids' friends and how many of them are doing service. And so I think these kids that I know very well, they're great kids. I thank them in particular, and I also thank their parents. So. Okay, Town of New Canaan Affordable Housing Committee Town Hall Meeting Room, regular meeting, Monday, November 11, 2024, 7 p.m. Item number 1, roll call and call to order. Is Chris here?
On the phone.
Chris.
Hi.
Kristen Nielsen.
Here.
Bill Perrette. Here. Jane Williams.
Here.
Jeff Williams.
Here.
Mike Sweeney.
Here.
Maria Weingarten.
Here.
Hillary Orman.
Here.
And I am here. Great. Item number 2, minutes. Do I have a motion to approve the minutes of the meeting held on October 7, 2024?
So moved.
Hillary, do I have a second?
Second.
Second from Jane. Okay, super. Next thing I'd like to do is I would like to amend the agenda. And I would like to amend, let's call it 2A, amend the agenda for affordable housing goal discussion with Scott Hobbs and Sarah Carey. Do I have an motion to amend the agenda?
I'll make the motion.
Okay. I got Bill and I've got Maria. Okay, super. So Scott, this is your 17th town meeting in about the past week or so. Sarah, this is probably your 15th. But it would be great to first hear from you, Scott. You can give us a brief, and we did have our executive session previously. I think we'd all love to hear update on strategy, and particularly about how the Housing Authority is thinking about potentially apportioning units towards different types of housing, and obviously towards potentially affordable housing.
Good.
Oh, and let me interrupt. Part of the method to my madness tonight is listen to Scott talk about the strategy there. Then Sarah is going to talk about how that then potentially translates into a moratorium strategy. What do we need? When do we need it? And then we have Rick Redness from his firm. Rick will tell you more about his background if you don't know him, but Rick does a heck of a lot of work all around Fairfield County, and a lot of it has a workforce affordable housing touch point. And then what I'd like to do is just all of us, let's have a brainstorming discussion. Rick, with your help, Scott, you've developed a model, and Sarah, you're the town planner. So I think we got some really good people in the room.
Sure. So as everyone's heard, with Scott Hobbs, 48 West Road in Canaan, as everyone heard, we did close on the Avalon deal, and it was rather precarious to say the least. And it was very, I think one of the things that we learned is that you certainly want to have more equity going into a deal like this. No matter how much everyone guarantees that you're fine, it's all good, it's all going to work out. At the end of the day, equity comes up and came up for basically every 3 hours for the last 2 weeks worth of the deal. So. But we did manage to close. We now have 104 units. Of the 104, 21 need to become 80% AMI compliant within the next year-ish, and that should not really be an issue. That's required under the Fannie Mae senior debt. Sometime, our theory is that it's sometime out in year 3, so call it 2027, early 2028. We'll take a look at what's happening inside of town and how many more affordable units have come out, what the current state rules are, what everything's is out there. And at that point, we as a community get to decide how many of the units we will need to convert over to guarantee a moratorium in 2028. It's possible we don't need to do any, which would be good. Keeping the units at market rate is obviously a very good economically. And the more we can keep at market rate for longer, the better things off are for the project. As we get out to 2032, barring some sort of other really massive development on some part, we will need to convert over some of the units. And again, this will just be, we'll do an audible whenever this comes up as to how many we need to convert. It's going to cost money to convert units from market rate to affordable, and it'll end up probably costing a lot of money, just like building the units would end up costing a lot of money.
If you were gonna convert today, what do you think your out of pocket would be? Not asking you to project out.
Sure. I mean, you're probably about $500,000 per unit.
Per unit.
Correct. And over time, we'll be slowly paying off parts of the loan. Rents will continue to go up. And so that number should end up shrinking. But it's still going to be substantive. And if we had to go ahead and build units, you're probably somewhere in the neighborhood of like the town having to kick in around $300,000 to $400,000 per unit. You do have construction grant, the 4% tax credits, which would come off of that. But we still have never really been able to determine how you work land into that equation. Does that actually cover the purchase of land or not cover it? And obviously that's land dependent.
What percent AMI is it when you're talking about what it would cost? You're talking about going to workforce, going to
So
affordable?
right now, we'll be at 80% AMI, and the 80% AMI really is kind of workforce housing. So now we're down to levels that more people will in New Canaan will actually qualify for, as opposed to
Financing?
it is for the Fannie Mae financing. And then obviously we got to go to 80% SMI when it gets time for having to convert over for moratorium time.
Scott, why does Fannie have that requirement?
Because it's essential housing bonds is the type of bond that we used, and we did get preferred or credit enhanced. So we were at 4.82, I think was the final number for our senior debt, which is obviously good in this environment. Was very, very helpful. In the meantime, we're going to try to run it as a premium product, and we have Greystar as the property manager, very good, well-known property manager. I think everyone was finally relieved in the property to hear that it's going to basically remain a market rate property and their lives will not change. It certainly was awkward at my public hearing, the little hearing one, where you weren't allowed to tell anyone that. So, I mean, that's really, not a whole lot more to the strategy than that. I do think that things for the town to go over would be, how do we go ahead and start planning and funding for affordable housing going forward? Because again, there are no free options. They're all expensive, and just how much do we want to do it as lump sum whenever it comes up, or do we want to plan for it? And then I think under for the commission, certainly and under the housing authority, we're looking toward guidance as to what else can and should we be doing. This Riverwood was not an end in of itself, but it bought us time in order to hopefully do something very considered and thoughtful over the next 8 years as we work toward the 2032 moratorium, as I'm taking for granted that we'll go ahead and take care of the 2028.
In response to converting a unit today, 500,000, what are some of the big items?
If you take the rent, and if you were to drop the rent by $2,500 per unit, and at subordinate debt rates that we currently have at 6%, and you work that out, you've got, basically you need to get about $500,000 for converting that.
And is it accurate that they have about 20% turnover annually right now?
Yes.
No idea whether that continues that way, but that's what it is now.
In theory,
It's 20.
Yeah.
somewhere around 20. I mean, and you'll have some people have been there for a very long time. Others who have just come, and they come for very, very short times. The affordable units should turn over less. So because we have fewer market units, we'll probably have less turnover than before.
Makes sense.
But we'll see how that all plays out.
To that point, what's been your experience at Mill Pond and in terms
Millport,
of turnover?
sure.
Millport, sorry,
Millport and
Millport.
Canaan Parish have very low turnover.
Yeah.
Millport has a little bit more. We'll see how Canaan Parish actually has two parts to it. It has the Section 8 and it has the affordable part. The Section 8 has virtually no turnover. I mean, once people get Section 8 vouchers, very few people lose those over time. For the people in the affordable, Canaan Parish has not had a lot of turnover yet, but of course, it's also brand new. And you ought to do whatever you can to stay in Canaan Parish. It's a really, really nice project. Millport's very nice also, but it's not quite at that same level. And it has, we have a couple of structural issues with parking, amount of parking and green space and some other things that it would have been nice to have had more of those, but we also needed to get the units.
Is there an upper limit on the number of units at Avalon that you would want to see affordable?
It's all a function of economics, and it as a industry kind of standard, there's sort of a 60% market, 40% affordable. And that probably has to deal with if you are charging premium rents at a certain point, if there's 10 premium apartments and all the rest are SMI, you probably have a problem getting premium rents for that. But there's no reason that we can't convert the entire project over. So if there was someone wanted to put in 500 or 600 units someplace that we did not want, town would have to come up with a lot of money, but we could do it and we could convert all of them.
What about the land? Like if we wanted to do some additional, because now that it's contiguous, there's probably some opportunity there for redevelopment. Should there be a need or?
We'll try to dig into that. It is going to be hard because unfortunately they're
Slope.
entirely, slope, there's wetlands, there's a whole lot of other things. And probably the hardest part is that it's two separate financial entities. And so we'd have to get approval from bondholders, two completely separate series of bondholders in order to try to carve off any of the property and do something different. However, there may be something that inside of town rules, maybe we are able to go ahead and through zoning, do some sort of a special zoning arrangement that would allow us to take advantage of that without causing issues for the bondholders. It'll take some creativity and some help on our financial part to make that happen. But it could somehow.
Congratulations. Well done.
Well, and thanks to a whole ton of people around town, all over the place that each time that we ran into insurmountable obstacles, somebody would say, hey, have you talked to this person? Or can I help here? Or can I do something else in this spot? And it made a humongous difference because, again, there was a lot of insurmountable obstacles. And so having people in the town step up was a really big deal and very gratifying being a member of the community. So
I'm not going to let you go yet, Scott. So how would you think, so you're saying conceivably it could go 100% affordable?
correct.
Okay, I'm surprised. That's a good thing. But I didn't think so you could even do it under, even vis-a-vis the debt structures
Correct. And there's callability issues. And so that,
on the bonds.
correct.
Yeah.
And so we're able to call all the subordinate bonds if we're taking units to more affordable levels.
Yeah.
And that's one of the ways that, of course, we'll be able to do that. But I'm not sure under the Fannie side. I think the Fannie is not callable without making them whole under their other debt. But that still ends up being a reasonably good interest rate right now.
Yeah.
Obviously, the town can borrow it less, but how much of actual town money do we want to be using? How much do we want to have the town loan money into the project at a better rate?
Yeah.
And again, what will rates do over the next decade?
Yeah.
And who knows? We all knew that, then that'd be wonderful. But fortunately, we don't.
How many units do we town actually control in terms of rentals or whatever?
So we
Developments.
we-
And then my follow-up question would be, we have a philosophy, we're a pretty big landlord, right? And so what's the philosophy as a landlord?
So, and Sarah can correct me under this, but for housing authority, we control 213 units. So 113 at Millport, 100 at Canaan Parish. We now end up controlling 104 additional. So now we're up to 217. for other affordable units in town. You have Schoolhouse Apartments, which is 40 units. And then you also have not the Schoolhouse Apartment, the South Avenue Cottage, or it only counts as one. Pretty much it, or is there a couple? I'm sorry, Mill and Millport, I combined there. And Mill and Millport are actually 4 separate units on that.
So is that not an additional 40?
No. And so, as far as the philosophy goes, we want to end up maintaining our assets in a way that we don't want to end up with the old Millport. So we want to continue to fund them and actually keep them up to date and keep them current and functioning. We don't want to set up a trap for the future. I think we want to provide as good a living experience for our tenants as we can. So we want to act like a real landlord, and make it so that even though some of the people, this might be their only option because of the rents, we still want them to be a qualified tenant, treat them with the full dignity that they're entitled to, and have them come away having a superior experience as as a tenant of one of our properties. Obviously, the experience at Millport will be different than the experience at Riverwood. But even besides that, treat with respect and try to provide value at whatever level we're.
Whose responsibility is to sort of define that philosophy and maintain that philosophy and improve it? Which can, in the town?
I guess it's us. The housing authority is,
Housing authority?
yeah, I'd say that we have that.
Independent organization.
Correct.
There's meetings every month, and the tenants appear, and there's a public meeting every month to get immediate feedback and problems.
Correct.
There's always problems. Everyone has leases, and leases are negotiated every year. You have to qualify every year.
And right now we have very good property managers. Westmount is managing Canaan Parish and Millport, and they were a huge step up from we went through a long period of not having great managers, and Westmount's really done a great job of making the situation good for everybody, from the board down to the tenants, which is wonderful. And Greystar so far has been, not surprisingly, a very professional organization that's been very helpful and is doing the job the way that they're supposed to do it.
Chris, you have a question?
Yeah, so Scott, we talked about percentages, and I understand in theory it can go to 100, but practically speaking, luxury apartments with amenities and a luxury manager, what is the maximum you think we can go to of affordable while maintaining the overall environment?
It literally is a question of money. So it's however much we're able to raise through whatever source we choose to raise it. A lot of it, of course, would come from the town, would drive that economic part. As far as what's the tolerance level again for high-end high-end tenants living inside of an overwhelmingly affordable project, I think there's a lot of variables. I don't know the answers to that yet. I'm sure it's something we'll be delving into more over the years. But I'm sure that there's a breaking point where you lose that percentage. And in the meantime, it's also driving that is just how many other units are available anywhere nearby and what do those cost? So, is it a 20% discount over what it currently is if you reached a 50-50? Is it a 10%? I don't know. And if anyone has any information or data on that, I'd be very interested in it.
Scott, what do you think, having gone through this, what do you think the ability to potentially replicate this, albeit probably on a smaller scale in other parts of town?
I think it's actually, I used to think that it was not replicable, but unfortunately I learned way too much. And the reality is that I believe that if there's not a tight NDA or we're able to work through issues on a town level behind the scenes enough that we can actually raise substantial capital internally, and whether that capital again is a loan or grants or whatever inside of the town, I think that it is replicable. And this, an issue with these Fannie Mae bonds is that it turned out we were the only people, the second housing authority to ever utilize this exact part of the bonds. And the only other people who had done that was the Housing Authority of LA. And obviously you typically think in Canaan and LA housing authorities in the same breath and everything, but it's not. And each step of the way, we found these little just bombs inside of this debt structure that everyone go, that can't be right. And oh yeah, no, that's exactly right. And really, again, the only way to solve that is through additional equity. And so as long as you can raise the equity up front, you can replicate it.
Yeah.
And again, we're facing it, even with Riverwood, we just didn't have to come up with the equity today. We'll be coming up with the equity later as we want to try to convert it into SMI.
Yeah.
There was also, in theory, thanks to Randy Salvatore coming up and actually identifying Avalon early enough, Darien was not able to move quickly enough. And there was just no way. They had like a 30-day window, and 30 days isn't even remotely close. But one of the things that allowed us to actually do this deal with Avalon was the fact that we were able to, the price was set ahead of time because they had 19 other bidders who were all bidding in the same marketplace. So you're like, well, that's the price.
That's the market test.
That's the market. Now, if we had thought about Avalon a year ago, we could have possibly set up a financial structure and worked through all the financing and talked about everything and been ready to actually compete in the marketplace. And in theory, we're able to much better compete in the marketplace because we're able to adjust the taxes, do a pilot program and adjust the taxes. And in theory, the town's able to borrow better than most private entities. Now, of course, there's a lot of money sitting on the sideline and real estate's funny and, how much is it worth? And it's like, well, it depends what you're trying to accomplish. And if you're looking for generational wealth transfers, if you've got, tax deferral things, if you're selling something and buying, it doesn't have to make sense to anyone except for the buyer. And so who knows what a competition would have been in the real market.
Got it. Can you stick around?
Sure. Happy to.
Sarah, can you join us, please? Rick, feel free to, if you want to move into that seat next to Mike. So Sarah, if you don't mind bringing us up to speed on where you think we are.
Yeah. So I'm going to share my screen so everyone can look at the same thing. So, first and foremost, just a reminder of value per unit. Just the bottom right corner, 80% SMI is 1.5 points, which is what I will mostly be talking about tonight. Although 60% of a rental unit is 2 Hue points and 40% is 2.5. Just assuming that we're never going to try to sell these units, so they're all rentals. Where we are today for a 2028 moratorium, Canaan Parish, we have 49 units left. Those points are available now, and it's 74 Hue points under the current 830G regulations. Obviously, that's subject to change, but hopefully will not unless it changes in our favor. We then at Millport have 31 units left over back from the 2016-2017 development that had been rejected in the earlier moratorium that the new legislation has now changed and says that we can use the holdover points. So that's 31 units, 46.5 Hue points, which gets us to being 30 Hue points short for our next moratorium. So with the new Avalon property, essentially, if you're only converting to 80% SMI, we need 20 units to get us an even 30 points. So ideally, as Scott had said, that'll be available in 2027 to 2028. That leaves you with 84 units left. Depending on how you deed restrict them, you get 1.5 to 2.5 points per unit, up to 84 units. Like I said, I have some calculations on a later slide just to give you all an idea. In addition to that, we have the Burtis Avenue development, which depending on which is 3 units, they have their building permit. We're hopeful that they will be CO'd and finished before 2028. We're not sure if those units are going to be for sale or rental. So at most it'll be 4.5 Hue points, or it'll only be 3. And then 112 Main Street just got approved by P&Z last month. It's going to be 2 affordable housing units, same thing. We don't know if it'll be for sale or for rent, and it'll be 2 to 3 Hue points maximum. And again, hopefully those will be onboarded before 2028.
Can I just ask, are
Yeah.
those forever affordable or those
No,
are
so
just 40 years?
So the Burtis and the Main will only be 40 years.
Okay.
So as I essentially just said, basically we have 120.5 Hugh points available between Millport and Canaan Parish. We need about 150, so we need 30 more. With Riverwood, as Scott said, I think 21 units are going to be 80% AMI right away. That doesn't count. But in theory, we can switch those over to SMI. If you do 80% SMI, you need 20 units to get to the magic 30 number. If you do 60% SMI, you only need 15 units. And then if you go 40% SMI, you need 12 units. I don't know how realistic either of those are, but just so you have them, that's how many units would be needed. And I'll send this to you all afterwards, so you don't have to
Thank you.
take notes. So
Sarah, do you have a view as to, what percent SMIs we should think about?
no, so I mean, I'm not a money person in this situation at all. I'm more the Hugh Point person. It really goes back to, cost benefit analysis of what works for the town and really figuring out, as Scott said, what that magic number is to be able to keep getting the market rate, rents or not, to really weigh what is more cost effective and makes more sense for the town. So I don't really know what the best strategy is.
Okay.
Okay, so for 2032, let's say the town decides they want to convert those 84 leftover units. Let's go 80% SMI, you get 126 Hugh points. So assuming your 2030 census doesn't change the number of Hugh points you need, we're still 24 Hugh points short, essentially, of a full moratorium. But then using the 40-60 rule that Scott kind of talked about, and assuming that 40% of the units is the maximum you're going to get, you really only have 21 units then that will be available for 2032. And then on the right side of the column, that kind of shows you in theory what Hugh points you may get if assuming Riverwood stays at only 40% affordable. Any questions about this slide? No. Okay, so that's kind of everything. So my key takeaways from this are 2028, as long as we can convert those 20 units, we should be covered for the next moratorium. 2032, we're not fully covered. If we stick to only 40% affordable, you're looking at 100 to over an 100 point deficit on Hugh points for that next moratorium. Or if you go 100% affordable, you're still 25, 30 Hughes short.
So, and that translates roughly to how many units? You got to make assumptions. I know that.
So let's say you're 110 points short at 80% SMI, that's about 73 units.
73.
Can you talk about the configuration of what those units are? So they're two bedroom, most of them are all.
Well, so that doesn't matter anymore, the number of bedrooms. All are this, all Hugh points are assigned the
I
same now.
understand,
Yeah.
but if we converted things that are multiple bedrooms into one bedroom units, if we did some renovation work, you could get more points out of them as well.
Yep. I'm not sure about the bedroom.
Yeah.
No, it's a great,
breakdown.
I mean, it's a great question. I mean, you might be able to, it would likely be expensive and don't know if the layout works for it. I believe it would be unlikely to get 2 units out of a 2-bedroom. I mean, out of a 3-bedroom, you might be able to. And maybe studio as opposed to 2 studios as opposed to 1 bedrooms, but it would have to be looked at really closely. It'd be hard to do. It's, I mean, it's,
Because you're missing plumbing, all that.
yeah, like a 3-bedroom to a 3-bedroom to a 1 to 2 1-bedrooms might be okay. And just a square footage wise. And then again, you have to actually lay it out. So you get an entryway in and you have windows and you gotta have everything else work. So it'd be tough.
Hard to retrofit, yeah.
Yeah.
But from a demand perspective, isn't, and when we talked about 2 and 3 bedroom units being ones that have more demand.
And I think that's an interesting data point, if it's impossible to split them up, if there's work to be done lobbying about the Hugh points, and what you get for 2, 3 bedrooms. And if we knew what our demand was versus our availability, particularly with this new project, I feel like that data could be really helpful for us in that endeavor. You probably know better than I do, being an advocate for it, but I think having that, you know, if we know that there's 32 bedrooms there and that's our biggest demand, that could be helpful, I think.
Yeah.
Just been lobbying hard for it. That might be easier than trying to split them up into studios and 1 bedrooms
Yeah.
that might not move as fast.
I mean, they sunsetted it, so it would be nice if they just brought back what they had sunsetted.
Yeah, yeah, which I think since there's precedent for it,
It's rational.
that seems
and
rational and well. And
Gosh.
easier to achieve.
Not a lot of rational
but-
going on.
If I know you're incredibly busy, but that kind of information, I don't know if that comes from the housing authority about the demand or the wait list or what have you for,
Well, we can probably, what we can get you the splits as to what we currently have. And just axiomatically, again, we fill the 1 bedrooms,
uh-huh.
but they're always a slog. And then the 2 and 3s have multi-year waiting lists and, which then raises its own problems, but
Right.
Those fill up pretty quickly and.
yeah.
The other thing that would be very helpful from a communications perspective, I think, would be to understand what these various levels mean in terms of who are our neighbors, who, we talk about workforce housing. What does that look like?
The income
Period.
levels of the.
Yeah, I think because to talk about numbers versus people,
Mm-hmm.
I think is less helpful.
You don't think in AMI terms?
Well, I mean, now I do,
Every
but I'm
day?
not proud of it, Scott.
So when you did the transaction and you assume there were 20 units that were today going to be used in the affordable housing pool, was there a break-even analysis or a profit analysis and just,
Oh,
so,
I mean, we have a really cool, detailed, great pro forma. And again, we were revising it every.
yeah, but
day
it shows you
multiple
what, was your target break-even?
times. No, our target was actually make money.
Make
I
money,
mean, because the objective again today, we don't need anything.
okay.
And the fact that we're able to provide the affordable.
So if you, let's just say you made 5%, pick a number, whatever it was. But then if you convert the other 84 units, there's a pretty substantial cost per unit. So then that cost would be compared to other alternatives, right? I would
Yes.
assume.
Yes.
So it may not be the most, it may not be economically the best way to go to convert the 84 units, let alone to split them up or do something else. Presumably at some point, someone will do that, not today, 5, 10 years in the future, right?
Yeah, and that's, I mean, when we started the pro forma, we were, call it like a $600,000, $700,000, $800,000 a year profit that grew $100,000 and so a year until we got to amortization in year 6, in which case it dropped, but then went back up. Income wise, it was still going up. At the end, we ended up, we're probably in the 300,000, starting 300,000 profitability, and then that'll go up by about 100,000 a year or so for a while, which is good, but that's off of a pretty big base.
How have we done over the last 10 years in terms of the housing authority's projection on profits?
Sure. Well,
I think I got my answer.
Well, when we started, I mean, it's kind of part of the story. I mean, when we started, nobody had done this ever before. And so the very first Millport redevelopment was cutting new ground. And I've said before that Chuck Berman, who was so influential on this project, luckily people didn't want to say no to him. And they said yes to a lot of stuff they shouldn't have said yes to. We managed to get it done under a shoestring. And then what we made is a profit on that. We immediately parlayed into the next one, which then parlayed into the next one. And so we got a lot of work done very, very quickly, but it used up literally like all of our resources. And so we've been, ham and egging it for the last 7 or 8 years. And then finally, well, probably 10 years or so. And then finally we ended up with Canaan Parish. We really came into its own. Millport is now, the whole Millport complex is profitable. And the hassle is that, again, percentage wise, it's not great, but it actually is self-sustaining and moves forward. We're probably a little bit short on some of our deferred maintenance, but not badly. And then for Canaan Parish, that's cash flowing very nicely and is profitable, but that has those 60 Section 8 vouchers, which makes a big difference. Very big.
And I was just trying to understand the conversion of the 84 units, a big cost, which you either write a check for or you compare it to alternatives, right?
Correct.
Right.
Correct.
And as you become a landlord for more and more properties, you can't defer your maintenance. It's okay to defer maintenance on your own house
Right.
or two houses, but when you're doing it for 400 units, it becomes a heck of a problem, right?
No, and again, we're within reason for what we're doing. Before, there was times when, no, that wasn't within reason. One of the other issues that comes up is that in the not too distant future, I mean, if we had another Riverwood come up, or Avalon at the time, so if we have another Avalon come up, that would kick us over 400 units. And at that point, we have to have a paid housing authority. I mean, as it is, we're kind of stretched here, and luckily, again, we have very good professional managers in the way, but when things happen, it starts to really tax the bandwidth of our group.
By law, you have to have, by law, you have to go over 400, then
No,
it's not by law.
but this is
Statistically speaking.
and it's one of the problems that comes up, and that I don't think it's an unintended consequence of the 830G rule, is you have a whole bunch of, old mom and pop housing authorities that we used to have 50 to 200, 100, 150 units all across Connecticut. And now they're forcing everyone to go ahead and get more and more and more. And all of a sudden you look up and go, well, we got to have professional management. But the reality is that managing real estate is not overly complicated and demanding most of the time. So either you hire someone really overqualified who's going to be bored stupid, or you're going to hire someone who's marginally qualified who can't handle the next group of things that come up. So we're in that no man's land in the middle. And this would be something that, again, ideally, maybe some of the other housing authorities, we can come together and share some resources and help each other in a way that would be beneficial. Because 400 units is a lot of units to manage on a volunteer basis. It's nothing on a professional basis. So here we are in this middle zone without, not properly tasked.
And I think as we're accounting for these things too, I think because we're not our own housing authority, we don't probably even get credit for some of the vouchers that may be living here that are sitting in Stamford or Norwalk Housing Authority, but living in New Canaan.
I would agree. Yeah.
So, I mean, I think that it's such a flawed system. So it's just arbitrary.
I think even last time I was here, I'm almost done with the Power Broker with Robert Moses. And so I'm learning all about authorities and how to really control things and get into the financing. And unfortunately, he made it all illegal. So
That's why I guess that if I look at New Canaan's vouchers, we have 33 on record. Hartford's got 8,991. New Haven's got 7,632. So you've got 19 housing authorities that have 75% of all vouchers, and the other 150 towns get the remaining 20%. It's just a egregious system.
Scott, what is the lifespan, generally speaking, of a multifamily unit? Like when do you have to start seriously looking at renovating, replacing, tearing down, rebuilding? Like, how long do these things last?
I think everyone's proven they last forever. That just depends what you can tolerate. We just did a full study at Millport, and I think they came up with around $10 million over the next 10 years, something like that. And that's with these units already being anywhere from 13 or 14 years to 7 years. And a lot of that is parking lots. You get into the roofs, you start replacing windows, you have to upgrade a bunch of elevator components and the security and the lighting and all of that. Meanwhile, each unit itself tends to get upgraded each time it turns over. So you end up doing some added patching and replacing, and the appliances burn out, and those are all operating expense stuff that you deal with. So it's a functionally, I mean, they never have to go bad because you keep replacing. It's the 100-year-old axe that's on its 12th handle and 9th head. That's what ends up happening. So you just keep replacing pieces as stuff happens. But again, over time, obviously fashion changes and style changes and what's required. And eventually some upgrades cost more than others. Like the original Millport, they passed their lifespan. They no longer worked. Up on top of the hill, the mill apartments on top of the hill, which was the second grouping, they were built in 1980-ish. And they passed their lifespan. Canaan Parish was around 1980 also. And, so call 25 to 30 years, you ought to do some sort of a serious redevelopment.
But we can't get Hugh points again. That's what I'm thinking, is that's a little bit of a flaw in the system too, is that we buy these things, they have a lifespan, and yet if you deed restrict them in perpetuity, 40 years in, you can't tear them down, rebuild them, and get more Hugh points. So how do we find money or even motivation to renovate things when there's no, if it's all a Hugh point game, it's not gonna get us any.
I think there are grants and other ways to get money to do renovation stuff. We haven't hit that point yet, because again, when we started being active, it was too late to save any of the old stuff. So there is money available to do that, but it does raise a question as to how do you go ahead and keep encouraging the redevelopment? And as we had that fight with the state, that it's like, no, these had to come down. And then luckily it turned out those were actually not 830G compliant. So that is what saved us. And I think the state would probably come back and say, well, you said you're going to do affordable housing for everybody, and here you are. And so you need to keep doing your affordable housing. And this is meant as a good for the community, which I think we all agree it is a good for the community, but it's also very expensive, good.
Yeah. The other question I had is, you use the money from the Affordable Housing Trust Fund for some of the equity and Avalon deal. I'm just curious, how much money did we have to put towards that, and how many years did that collected for?
Sure. So the reality is that we drain the Affordable Housing Trust Fund by paying the deferred developer fee to the Housing Authority for work that we'd done on Millport. So we never got paid our fee for that because there wasn't enough, and we kept using the money for other things such as Canaan Parish. So there was about $1 million that we were able to draw down, which paid our fee. And then Housing Authority, I think we had about $1.2 million to $1.4 million. So we had about $2.5 million, call it about $2.5 million that we put in.
Okay. But Sarah, do you know how long that $1 million, like,
So
is that a 2-year collection on the affordable housing?
So since COVID, it's been about 400K a year that we're collecting, but that is a function of private construction that goes on in town. So in theory, if construction slows, the fee, like we won't collect as much.
Maybe if we can bring in Rick, Rick, if you can.
I'm loving this.
Good. Rick, maybe, I mean, you've had conversations with a couple of us. We brainstormed a few things, but maybe if you can tell the committee your background. And then we would love to, and I'm really happy I got these guys here tonight because this gives context. And so maybe if you can give us some thoughts about,
Sure.
we've talked about what our, what our objectives are.
For this, I applaud you. I think you did a great thing for the long haul. Volunteer, amazing. So I've been trying to write some notes and some answers, some questions. So I want to answer one question. About 10 to 15% less on the market rate units was the experience of the Stanford Housing Authority when we had a model which was 60-40. So it was 60% affordable,
Okay.
40% market rate, and that's what they were running. But you can check with Vin Tufo, you can check with the Stanford people, or and find that out. So it was less than many people thought it would be. Just wanted to answer that question. There's a lot of different things with my background, but just sort of somewhat chronologically, I started in this business in 1978. And I think at that time, we were just wrapping up Canaan Parish, which was done, I think, by F.D. Rich. So I didn't work on it or anything, but I knew that we were involved. Also, I used to be a public school teacher, and I got into planning through Paul Davidoff. Paul Davidoff was the godfather of inclusionary zoning. He was the town planner of New Canaan way back when, probably maybe even 50s, not the 60s. I've had the pleasure of writing a lot of affordable housing regs for Darien,
Wilton, a lot in Westport and Stamford mostly. First wrote it, some of it, I think it started in Wilton, and we had preferences, employees and things like that. And then we took that reg that we wrote, brought it to Darien, but then an 830G person took that to the feds and said, this isn't right. So we had to go back through the regs and take out the preferences for town employees and things. But certainly, as a former school teacher, I would encourage you to get as many teachers housing in New Canaan as you can in your, whether it's market rate or written down, because it's tough when teachers have to drive 2 hours to get to work. So it's just an aside. Anyway, I actually went back to planning school, got a second master's degree, and that's how I got into all of this. I was in the governor's task force in 1999 when we created the moratoria points, because up until that point, there was really zero motivation from the towns and nobody was doing it. And I've never done an 830G. I hope to never do an 830G, but 830G is one of the reasons why I've been able to write a lot of zoning and get a lot of affordable housing, because towns come to realize that it makes sense, both politically, in terms of the character that you're not allowed to say of your town, and in terms of providing housing, diverse housing, which I do believe in. So the company's Redness and Mead. We do surveying, engineering, planning, and zoning. I was involved writing the zoning for, what is it,
Riverwood.
Riverwood, for Riverwood in its prior life. My first draft had inclusionary housing in it, and I was told to take it out. So I don't know what else you need on my background.
Perfect.
Okay. Just a couple of things that while I've been sitting here, most of the zoning that I write is forever, because 40 years, I can't believe it. I've been doing this 46 years. So boom, that means your grandchildren can sell it and the need is still going to be there. So I'm a believer in forever. And one of the things, when I came out of the 1999 Governor's Task Force, I went around to different towns. Westport was the first one. And I said two things to them. Number one, you should embrace it. Number two, you should approve as modified. You shouldn't be denied. And you lose 2/3 of the cases, you lose. So I understand you have 3 cases right now. Which 2 do you want to lose? So settling and not fighting 830Gs is highly recommended. And I know, like, when towns have to make a decision, Westport had to make a decision. They had an 830G. It was on the Post Road, 1177. It was an office building that was being changed, housing added. It was 4 stories, which Westport skyscraper, 4 stories. And they had on the table not an 830G at 3 stories. I'm oversimplifying. I wasn't really involved in the details. And it was a long debate. Do we take the fewer points, the less affordable than the lower scale? And ultimately, they made the decision to take the points. And they stayed with it. It was on the Post Road and it was commercial area. And that's what they did. So each one of these decisions is very unique in terms of that. I'm a believer in as many tools in the toolbox as possible. So fee in lieu, and I did have the pleasure of working with the PZC when you wrote your regulations and built in a fee in lieu and built in flexibility and incentives for density and coverage and height and things, all the good tools, you just need to have them to make it all work. I started to today. It was a nice town hall's closed, slow day. So I started going through some of your minutes and some of your things. You guys have done incredible work. gotten amazing things accomplished. You've got all the ideas are out there, you know, looking at where can you put housing, where, you know, so I think you've bought yourself some time and flexibility. And now you just have to start picking them off. Doing them. Happy to, questions or?
So, well, the question I have for all three of you is, so we're looking at a couple different strategies. One strategy, and Krista ran, we put everything on hold once we knew what was going on. But, one approach was to look at, I use the term greenfield, but the town provides land. And we looked at 7 or 8 sites. And, and then at that point, we put it on hold. Sorry?
I think we narrowed it down to 5.
Okay, 5, yeah. And so that's potentially one avenue to go as we continue to push that process forward. And, the town provides the land, which we all have sort of realized ultimately we have to do in that type scenario. So that's one approach we've been talking about. And then the second approach is trying to, replicate a Riverwood Avalon, albeit on a smaller basis. And probably, needing a commitment to have a certain funding availability and to be identifying properties. But, all three of you, how do you think about, and then the third approach, as I think about it, and, guys help me out here. The third approach is to continue to provide more tools in the toolbox by, using planning and zoning, frankly, and getting planning and zoning to continue to develop some additional incentives. But, how do all three of you think we as a committee should, think about those alternatives? And am I not expressing an alternative? Is there another alternative out there? But what's your advice? What's your thoughts?
So
I'll start and say zoning alone is not going to solve the issue. I mean, from what I showed you all before, we've had the inclusionary zoning for 3-4 years now. And I think it is a pretty robust regulation, and right now we're up to maybe 7 hue points. So that's not going to get us a moratorium or anywhere close to a moratorium. So clearly we're going to need intervention from the town to be able to achieve it. So that's my initial thought.
I was gonna add one more option in there.
Please.
I think developing town-owned land is one option, acquiring land or units is the second option. Zoning is the third option, but I think, as we've seen Greenwich do, and I wasn't on the financing committee, providing financing, putting money into the game, like the way the Greenwich Housing Trust is doing, is another option, because then you get to claim those as government assisted units. So I don't pretend to know how that could all work, but I think instead of providing land, if the town provides money, it's another opportunity we have.
So what, something that I've recently worked on in Westport, and actually similar happened in Darien, is special needs housing. The one we did in Westport, we took a town-owned property that they were trying to sell, and it was near a school, couldn't sell it. And we came up with a plan that we brought in Ableist, who is a special needs provider, and we built, in that example, I think we have 5. We wrote the zoning to be up to 6 units in a building. And so if you can visualize that, it's a 100-year-old house that got renovated. And that was done with fee and lieu funds from a for sale development, and seamless. And wrote the town a check for $500,000 prepaying a 49-year lease. And put in a couple $100,000 in a fund. So when the roof needs to get done or something during the time period, there's a fund that's just generating some income. And those get, pretty much 2.5 points each. So it adds up quickly. It meets a need that is in every community. politically was very much accepted as opposed to all the negative things that people bring to that discussion. People really related to that. So that's a tool, and that's probably a need in your community, whether it's adaptively reusing a building, and that could be a building, you know, anywhere. And depending on circumstances, could be on 7.
I think we got to go under the all of the above. I mean, I think that there's no question that we need a greater variety of housing and options in New Canaan. You know, recently developed properties have all done very nicely, and that shows there's a demand. And if we can go ahead and figure out how to not just hit the highest end of people, I mean, how we can prevent the barbells under the lowest and the highest, that would be great. Easy to say, no one's figured that out yet, so, you know, it's gonna be hard to do. But if we're able to pick up 10 to 20 points from, you know, individual developers, and then, you know, if we're able to use some town land for a project, and then if we're able to buy, you know, a couple of acres somewhere else and do another one, you know, you piece together another moratorium. And you're using different funding sources for each.
Yeah.
There's going to be overlap, but you can use some different funding sources. So hopefully we can make the dollars last more, and hopefully we put it out over a little bit longer period. Because again, I mean, like that whole, you know, if we had to do 30 units somewhere else in the next 4 years, that's a rush. You know, trying to do 80, 90, 100 units over the next 8 years is actually easier than the 30 over the next 4.
Yeah.
But, you know, we've got to get at least 2 projects under our belts and hope that there's some naturally occurring affordable housing happens along the way.
Yeah.
And I think and again, we'll have to figure something out under the development side of things to, you know, help under the development parts of stuff, but just trying to look for that guidance of creating inside a town a consensus as to where are we willing to accept what size development. I mean, can we go to 4 floors in a 20-unit building, or in a 60-unit building, or an 80? And what if it's in town? What if it only has mainly commercial neighbors? What if it's, you know, outside of the, I don't even know what you call city limits. Somebody asked, like, are you inside the city limits of New Canaan? And you're like, I don't know. I mean, what do you call the city limits? I don't know. But somehow trying to form that consensus. And as I think we've all talked about before, I mean, unfortunately, some people are going to be adversely affected.
Yeah.
Just because we're an already built out town.
Chris Wilson?
I was just going to touch on the point Krista raised about what Greenwich does. So the applicability it doesn't translate immediately, but it's essentially their affordable housing trust is there to enable the town through the Affordable Housing Trust to participate in projects that would have been 830G applications initially in order to bring the size and scale down. And they do that by, you know, their participation allows the developer to provide 80% AMI units instead of 80 and 60% of SMI units. And the improvement in income on those units allows them to have a smaller project and usually fewer overall affordable units. They are 40-year deed restricted units, so they're not forever units, and it's specific to things that are otherwise 830G. We do have a few of those that we're wrestling with at the moment, but there's unlikely to be new projects in the near future.
Hey, John, if I could just add to what Chris said.
Yeah, of course.
When the fella came from the Greenwich Housing Authority to brief us, he started by saying, we are not going after a moratorium. We are not trying to build up hue points. We're trying to alter the nature of the development that would be an 830G project without our involvement.
Yeah,
Well-
I think there must be a way to replicate that type of model in a different form. So whether we see somebody coming in with multifamily development and say, hey, you know, that would be great to have 5 affordable units in there. Do we have, I don't know what the number is, $2.5 million to buy down 5 units in this project and do you restrict them affordable? I mean, I'm talking in a more general sense about the town having a pot of money that it can put towards acquiring affordable units that are being constructed by a private developer. So-
Yeah, where they got their money, if I recall correctly, was the town agreed to put ARPA funds into to fund their original endowment. And they said they have had no luck in adding private funds to that, even though that was part of their strategy going forward. Yeah, I
Yeah.
agree with that. It's,
The key, though, is the amounts involved are relatively nominal. They put 50 to 100,000 in each project. It's really the fact that the town body or a town associated body is putting money into a project allows them to get benefit of the 80% AMI units rather than the 80 and 60% SMI units. Scott will be able to comment, but there's a significant increase in the net income effect of that. Costs are basically the same regardless of the type of units. So extra income goes straight to the bottom line.
Well, I guess that's sort of begging the question of, since we're talking about Greenwich and Darien, they've kind of abandoned the idea of achieving moratorium because you do end up chasing these, that it's really just a race and it's sort of like being on is that a viable option? I mean, is that something we might consider so that we do decrease that barbell, as you said, and try to think about it more creatively about having true workforce housing, having true sort of entry housing into our town instead of every property being bought up and then on a quarter of an acre, there's now a $5 million house or something where there was something a little bit more modest that might have been more affordable. But do we give incentives to buyers for that? Or I don't know what the answer is, but is there some limit to what we're afraid of being developed on like town sewer and water that we would be comfortable abandoning this strategy of achieving moratorium or no? I mean, is that?
What I think one idea that I think Christina Ross actually came up with the idea of doing buying rights at a much discounted rate to prevent the worst things that could happen. So if the vet was going to go ahead and sell their property, and if you sit there and go, okay, we'll tell you what, we'll give you $250,000 if you forever deed it that it can never be more than 2 stories tall or 3 stories tall, as opposed to somebody who might come in and go, well, I'm doing 6. And you're like, whoa, 6 is that offends, I think, almost anyone in New Canaan. 2 or 3 doesn't necessarily, and instead of having to buy the property at $1.5 million, you're able to prevent the worst thing from happening for 200.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I have no idea what the math is. I'm totally making this up. But if you could do something like that, could your money go further? But again, it raises one of those questions as to where what's inbound, what's out of bounds.
Yeah.
I mean, where are we willing to do that? Where are we willing to take risks that oops, sorry, somebody decided that on PONUS that actually I do want to put an 8-story building. You're like, and then again, at some point you're like, good luck. Good luck and make this happen.
Yeah.
I think we'll also see with like Darien, I think it's just a real fascinating case as to what does Darien look like in 2 years? I mean, can you drive through the town? What do the schools look like? How many people are there? Again, there's the proven need that we need more housing selection and choice.
Mm-hmm.
But you start at, I mean, do you know how many units are being added in Darien over the last year or the last 3-4 years?
I don't have that at my fingertips, no.
I mean, with 500 or 600? I mean, I have no idea. I'm not, I mean, it seems like a ton.
All of that.
Well,
no
yeah,
housing
but-
development.
I think one of the things we found, and most of my data is from Stanford, that's where the data is prevalent, but the amount of school children coming is less than 3 per 100 units. So it's a bit of a fallacy, unless you're building a lot of large units, that it's gonna, overrun your schools. Similarly, we have data from the water company, the WPCA. It is amazing with thousands and thousands of units added that water use was down for a variety of reasons. And WPCA was down. They got more money in and were able to fix things, which reduced, because they had leaking pipes and things with infiltrating groundwater. So it's not as dire as, and a direct correlation, add these units, this will happen. So I don't think you're gonna see Darien,
Well,
in big trouble.
no, I mean, and again, big trouble is one thing, but again, around here, it's like, wait a minute, I got another 4 minutes to drive across town. Do you know what a disaster that is? But it's, and it's, I actually raised one of the questions, and eventually, again, all the implications of what happens, you can't measure them all. But so if people are downsizing into apartments,
Mhm.
but now, and the apartments end up adding 3 per 100, but meanwhile, people who used to be empty nesters were living in houses that now have kids living in the, now have families living in the house that now have 3 kids. Is it really 3 kids? Or did you take people and again, downsize them and then other people got added elsewhere?
That's true to an extent, but then you have to ask yourself, if I'm downsizing and I can't stay in New Canaan,
Mhm.
I'm going somewhere else, and that house is still gonna be occupied by people with kids.
Yep.
So have you achieved what you wanted, or did you lose a wonderful person that grew up in the town and wanted to stay and be a contributing member? So to me,
I agree.
that's the calculation that's irrelevant. But,
Scott, to take your hypothetical of the vet, one of the things I wonder, and I'd love to hear your points of view on, is how we encourage, what happened with Avalon would not have happened conceivably without Randy Salvatore coming forward and saying, look, this is going to be available, and if we jump on this soon. We talked about this vis-a-vis realtors at some point in the committee, how to incentivize the community to come forward when you hear of rumors of things, or when you find out something is going to happen. Is there a way to do that in an organized way? Does it make any sense? Because that made the difference between this happening and not.
In a capitalist society, it's always tricky because again, if you accumulate the knowledge without having an action plan, odds are someone else is going to come up with an action plan.
Right.
Now, there's plenty of smart people out there that are already looking at all this. So, I mean, to think that nobody's figured out what the good properties are, where they could do it is probably naive anyway.
Mhm.
So I don't know.
It's also a struggle just because, like, let's say a property did come up potentially while the whole Avalon situation was going on. Would the town be able to mobilize to manage 2 of those at the same time? I
No.
don't think so.
No.
So,
Well, not housing authority.
yeah,
right?
but exactly. So, even if we did figure out a process to start letting the town know about potential projects coming up, how we don't have the manpower to, actually acquire those properties at the same time.
And we have a lot of processes.
Yeah.
Has to go through selectmen, board of finance, town council, at least once.
So from a process perspective, that may not be replicable. That might have been all the stars aligning.
Well, and I don't know under Freedom of Information Act, what's able to be discerned entirely privately. I mean, real estate transactions in theory are, but is hypothetical real estate transactions and creating a town plan? I don't know. I'll have to ask Nick that question or something, but because I think it'd be very useful information. But it's again, are we even asking it encourages more people to ask it, but again, it's being asked already and people
Yeah.
are doing it, so.
Yeah.
Probably good for us to have the info.
But, Sarah, from your seat, I would hypothesize that, people come in and they talk to you and you're seeing a flow of information.
Yeah.
Of what's coming up and, we've talked about certain properties and I think there's a knowledge base. Now, how do we act on it? Yeah, I get that. That's a different thing. But I think there's opportunities that are popping up there. We all talk about different opportunities.
Definitely. I definitely get contacted by, real estate brokers,
Yeah.
people trying to acquire land with questions. So I do hear things and.
Yeah.
But so what's missing is a process, right? That
Right.
the town or the
Right.
housing authority to act quickly.
Right.
Have the financing, figure out the financing, all of
Yeah.
that is a slow churning.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna name names, but probably half the people around here I've talked to about we've chatted about certain properties out there and yeah, it's out there. I don't think that's the challenge.
Well, and I'd worry a little bit about as an open community. Now it comes up that Roger Sherman versus I don't know, the another tight place or whatever, but Roger Sherman versus that area stuff. And so all of a sudden, okay, we got enough money to play defense in one place, but not the other. And so who gets the resources and how much? And how do you end up determining the winners and losers? Which we historically as a town don't do very well. That doesn't mean that we shouldn't do better at it and try to, again, determine that sort of process that we say, look, this is kind of the rules that we're setting up and this is how we're going to do it. And we'll do our best to maintain it. But it's tough. I mean, and again, historically, we don't do well telling people, sorry, we're not defending you, but we will defend this other person.
Yeah.
Even though that's not what we're saying, that's how it's of course interpreted and put out there.
Yeah. Well, Rick, something we talked about was, you talked about the idea of, you just go out with some RFPs, although I would think at step one is they're not real RFPs. But, for example, if we were to identify a couple of greenfield sites, I mean, thoughts on how to do that process? Because one of the things we have to do is, we have to come in front of the town bodies and say, look, here's a couple of things that this committee is recommending being considered. And at some point, you got to get going and jump into the cold water and actually do that.
I mean, if you had a particular site and you wanted to reach out to people with the RFPs, I think you would get very diverse people looking into them, from market rate to, there are real affordable housing developers who believe in affordable housing, and you're talking a lot about one area of workforce, but there are other needs in the community, and I think you probably get people, if they could get the land for free, that would make a very interesting proposal.
Is there a certain size, critical mass?
I don't know. I don't know that there is, because there are a lot of different types. Some people won't touch it unless it's X.
Yeah.
But it's getting harder and harder to find projects. Some people would love to do something in New Canaan.
Yeah.
If you identify a site and you have certain parameters, or you want to set certain parameters and see what kind of proposals, I think that would be a useful process.
Have you looked at all at conversion of office to residential?
A lot of it. The light and air is challenging. Structural can be challenging. So some buildings adapt more readily, but with what we see happening in that marketplace,
I said,
it's amazing. You
I
can,
yeah, let
Hey,
them,
Bob, can we mute the Zoom, please?
Dear,
she said, he emailed them.
I was just getting into that.
you wanted to figure out who it was, right?
Yeah.
So we're seeing office buildings going for pennies on the dollar. And so at some point, there may be a cross where right now it doesn't make economic sense because it's too hard to structurally to drop in light and air.
Yeah.
But it could get there, and you should be ready. That would be, I don't know how your office market is here. I would assume it's not as bad as many other communities, but that certainly is one. There were two other things I just made notes to think about, and that is tear downs. So you have a fee that you charge for building permits, but if I were in charge, I'd whack people for tear downs. If they can afford to buy a house that's a workforce type house, and they're gonna tear it down and build up a McMansion, they should be able to kick in more than 5 cents a thousand or $5 a thousand. So that's one thing to get your fund money up, I would think you could do. The other thing is, and I don't know what the politics right now, I was more involved with state government, I knew, but the towns always try to fight 830G and get rid of 830G. Instead of getting a laser beam, you should get some fractional points for replacing units that are obsolete. There's no question that you should get it, because here you have communities like yours, and Darien and Westport did it, when there are many, many towns that are doing nothing. So getting those fractional points, to me, is an encouragement to keep up the housing stock. Obviously, you have to balance that with not letting it go down, so then you can replace and get more points. There's got to be some, balancing to that. But just changing that law, and I guess they did some recent changes. There used to be a quarter of a point for 3 bedrooms. Did they get rid of that?
Removed that, yes.
They took that out too? Interesting. Seniors, do they still get only half a point for seniors?
Yeah, half a point.
Okay. The other thing is, to me, 40 years is a relatively short period of time. So if you do it forever, maybe you should get another quarter of a point. These are things that you can have your state legislators work on. Doesn't take up your time and effort, get them to earn their keep. And if the Gold Coast towns and the people that are usually fighting 830Gs are in, maybe the cities will go along with it. And so, again, you're scrapping for every little point here, and everyone is going to impact your new development there. So I would get every tool you can to work.
Rick, do you have any help under, I think you were to ask most developers, their biggest agony is they show up in front of the P and Z groups and they say, we want to do this. And P and Z goes, denied. And matter of fact, you might get advice, but you're going to get 8 separate pieces of advice, of which 6 of them is entirely contradictory. And so poor guy goes back and he does another study and he comes in with something and they can go, nope. And you get stuck. So how do you break that cycle to actually help that you, and again, I think there's some law stuff that they're not actually allowed to provide the full guidance and, push toward that end. What have you seen that's worked?
So the thing, I actually just did this in Westport and would suggest it to you, and that is a general development plan. So you can come in, whether you need a text change, you don't need a text change, somebody comes in with a general development. You don't have to invert every catch basin and design every system. You come in with your general plan. It wants to be this high, enough with a traffic study and some of those usual things, but it doesn't have $300,000 worth of drawings in order to get denied. So if you can short circuit the time and the cost, then people can be encouraged to come in. Let me give this a try. So that's something I would suggest you do is put GDP, General Development Plan, right in your regs. The other thing that does.
We don't have anything
We
at
do
all
not
like
have
that or a
anything.
mechanism to do that.
No. And the other thing it does is, with site plans, law requires, if you have wetlands, you have to get your wetlands first. So now you've spent all that money and then you get denied. If you do a general development plan, it skirts that. You're gonna go to the Wetlands Commission for a recommendation or a report or something, but you don't need the permit. So you're not stuck with all that agony. And again, people that are trying to stop everything, that's their first line of attack. And that's, a black hole because, it's gonna hurt the trees. And now let's find out 2 years from now in court. So you flesh out the opposition, you get all your basics done in a reasonable time and reasonable cost, and it's easy to close the gaps.
Which town did you say has done that?
I've had it in Stanford for many years, but it just wrote it in West.
Okay.
So it requires the commission to make a decision with the less detailed.
Right, yes, yes. And the commission still can ask for.
I'm for it, but I'm just thinking that could be a little
Yeah,
challenging.
yeah, but again, you know, your
It's changing that
decision.
order. It's changing that order, so we can fight over the project. And then if we agree on the project, then you can make
Then
sure the
you come back.
details, then make all the
Right.
details work, as opposed to make
Right.
every detail work, and then we'll talk about the project.
Right, because for, when you say no, when these communities, put you in that community, but when these communities that want to just say no, they are forced to say no for that, as opposed to making an excuse that, you know, the drainage is.
4 more firms, please.
What's that?
4 more firms. Let's go back.
So anyway, that suggests,
I'll let Krista and Sarah handle that one with,
it works.
I'm
Yeah.
sure it works.
No, it does,
It just might be enough. Oh,
It is an uphill battle, but again, if you're tying this, and we did, with inclusionary housing. So in the one that I actually wrote it for was a 10-unit project, 2 affordables. And we said, we'll come back with the details. But, you know, you establish the setbacks to the neighbors, you establish whatever conditions you want on it, but then you come back for that. You just don't need all those nitty-gritty designs. You know,
I mean, the whole economics of it is that you can spend you get one, affordable housing is so expensive to do.
Right.
That if you have to waste 3 times going in front of P and Z, it's like, well, I would have done 4 units, now I can do 1. Because the deal's I've already spent so much in P and Z that I can't do the deal anymore.
Yeah.
So
I'll
that's
give
huge.
you one example in terms of that. So, and this happened also in Westport. So I was called in to do an 830G. They had a 25-unit project. It was by exit 17 in Westport. And I said, I don't do 830Gs. I don't like the design. It's too many units. A 19-unit was a beautiful circle, drive in, drive around, everything laid out beautifully. And if we did the affordables, and that's when actually we wrote workforce housing into Westport with this project. So, but this developer, you know, didn't believe that Westport was going to give it to them. So they developed their 830G. They had their 25-unit plan. So I put in a 19-unit plan and got the nod 4-3. The next day they filed a 25-unit plan and they said, oh, wow, you know, we didn't know that was serious. And we refiled the 19-unit plan and said, you basically have like 45 days until the clock's going to hit you on the 25-unit plan. And they changed it and did it.
Yeah.
So, but again, that was something that they already had developed, but they had already invested in it, and changing from the 25 to the 19 didn't cost a lot of money.
Mm-hmm.
If you had a GDP, you could go in quickly and say, hey, if you do this, town, and this is reasonable balance, then I won't do an 830G. I mean, 830G is the elephant in the room. And, you know, I mean, you're all here talking about points and, you know, you've got a great strategy going on how to deal with it. But I think if you had some other tools in your toolbox, you could prevent 830Gs or settle 830Gs.
Anybody else? So closing question to each of you. What do you recommend this committee do next?
No pressure.
I'm gonna start with Scott because we're friends. I know I can put him on the spot. So I'm putting you on the spot, Scott.
Where are we building next? I mean, it's again, it's like the parameters under which, what's the next development, where is it appropriate for it to be doing development? And again, almost starting that sort of discussion with the town folks as to, we got all kind of get on board with this and live with each other, and we can't be burning everyone in effigy anytime they bring something up as a possible development spot.
Yeah. Sarah?
So I think first and foremost, the town needs time to figure out what their true philosophy is towards 830G. I think right now it's clearly moratoriums, but I think it's clear that that's not a 15 to 20-year solution. That may be a 4 to 8 to 12-year solution, but it's not the forever solution. So buy yourself the time now to figure out, what the long-term solution is. So to do that, I would first and foremost try to figure out what's cheaper, going with the Greenfield project or making all of Avalon affordable. Just generally speaking, what are the estimates? Because assuming you want a 2032 moratorium, you are going to need to build something. And I assume you all want to know, are you building a 30-unit project or a 100-unit project?
Yeah. And would you, so do you think it's pretty much, that's the decision, that's the key decision is Greenfield versus using Avalon Riverwood? Or do you think there's
So I think the first
what I call
decision is,
brownfield, replicating but on a smaller scale?
so I think the first decision is how much of Green or Avalon, how much of Avalon are you using? If you're using all of it, you may not need to do a greenfield. You may be able to brownfield, but if you're not using all of Avalon, you probably do need to use greenfield to get a much bigger project.
So wait, just to be clear, because this is not my. What's a brownfield versus a greenfield? Brownfield is smaller.
Well, I'm butchering terms.
So greenfield would be
Your
like
God-given right as an
using-
American.
There you go.
Greenfield would be like building on the Saks, the
So
fields.
green, empty lot,
Yeah.
brown, like brownstone or
Piece of land.
building or something,
Unbuilt. land.
existing
Yeah.
building.
Okay, okay.
And then in my crazy mind, and this is my expertise, either brownfield is, it's an office building or
Yeah.
it's a rundown. Maybe it's a couple of lots that have become available that have some houses on them, or
I appreciate that.
But to Sarah's point, who decides that policy in terms of, do we go 100% affordable at Avalon, or are we only gonna go 40 grand? I mean, I don't know if that's a financial decision, I don't know if that's a political decision,
I think it's all of those things.
and I don't
think it's an
know if that's
executive
our
decision.
group, if that's, the Board of Selectmen, I don't know who makes that call.
I think I'll give your 2 cents to the powers that be, and they decide after you've
well,
done your
legally,
facts.
tell me if I'm wrong, legally, it's the housing authority. You own Riverwood. Is that correct or not?
So, yes, and I was kind of surprised when actually not very surprised, but the number of housing authorities that don't get along with their towns is apparently far greater than those that do.
Yeah.
Luckily here, we don't have that issue. But it's, again, and I believe that especially here in New Canaan, here in New Canaan, we're all in alignment on this, and we're all looking for the same goals and trying to make New Canaan, keep it a special place, try to, again, enhance opportunities, whole lot of good stuff that goes along with that. So I think we're all in alignment. And I don't really actually have any choice because we don't have enough money to do anything on our own. So without the backup and support of the town, we're not going to convert a lot of units.
That's the thinking I would have, John, is practically speaking, or technically speaking, Scott can act. And he owns the property one of the properties we're talking about acting on, but practically speaking, somebody's got to come up with the dough to make it work. And the deep pockets here are the town. And
Chris Wilson?
Come up with the dough, but also it's really just a sunk cost, right? You don't get it back.
Oh, yeah, sure.
yeah.
Well,
Make it.
there is this is a money-making operation.
But if you make the conversion of the 84 units,
We can
whatever
still,
that number is, it's hundreds, it's a big number, right?
it's a big number. And
if
the
you're
only,
doing affordable housing, how do you get it back?
well, the only way, if the town provides loans,
Yeah.
then they can actually make money off of the deal too and fulfill a different role.
0% loan, right? But just no.
Well, not even, no, money-making loan. So if the town's borrowing it at 2 3/4 and they're loaning us at 3 3/4, and then we end up being, we knock 225 basis points off the loan, the loan has to be bigger than a grant. But and then the people in town hall can tell us whether or not what does that do to our credit rating and how much are we borrowing and all of that stuff. But yes, the answer is that it becomes ultimately, there's no
I'm
substitute
sure
for
you're right,
equity.
but mathematically,
It's a policy question in my mind. It's a policy question as to whether the town decides they want to be supportive of that conversion.
but it's a costly conversion.
Yeah.
It's not a money-making operation. It'll be hard to go out and find somebody to invest in that, other than the town.
Yeah, I mean, investing to take something to a lower rent.
Right.
That's a loser. Can't make enough on volume.
That's right.
Doesn't work.
Yeah.
Chris?
So I'm gonna suggest that actual analysis of build versus convert is something that we should take on as a committee, and maybe that starts in the finance committee. And then we sort of report out initial thoughts, but I think that's within the remit of this committee to make a recommendation to the bodies in town around that idea.
Everybody agree?
Yeah.
I think it's a great
That's
idea.
super helpful.
Okay.
Really
Since
helpful.
I haven't had my chance.
I was getting to you, Rick.
All right.
Okay, well, actually, I think we may have cut off Sarah. Sarah, you,
No, that was.
okay. Floor's yours. Rick.
So I would throw a dart at the wall, and my first dart that I would look at is train station parking lot, which the town owns, which was part of this deal that created this whole opportunity. Housing at a train station is a pretty good idea. It's kind of, obviously you're gonna replace all the parking for everybody. That's never gonna be a discussion. But to build above it, in some reasonable capacity, in some consistent character, with some significant amount of affordability, not 10 or 15%, but a larger, but not all, is what I would want, so it's more sustainable. And I'd take a look at that.
Well, we've actually identified 2 sites, right? The railroad lot and that's the one you worked on, Mike,
Yeah,
right?
piece on the south side of the tracks.
Yeah, one on Pine Street, yeah, so
Pine Street.
2 sites right adjacent.
Dramatically different in size,
Mhm.
but
But one you said was state-owned?
Yeah.
I mean, to me, second dart, just, you control your own destiny. You've obviously spent $75 million to control your own destiny.
Yeah.
That's what I would try to do. Anyway.
Technically, we only spent 2.
I don't know, I saw something to pay for about $4 million. Come on.
So I think we, early on, without knowing the economics, being burdened by that, as a committee, sort of think a little bit about not putting all our eggs in one basket, be better to disperse affordable housing throughout the town. I mean, I thought that, I don't know if that was a principle or something but if we were to do it at Avalon, that would not be consistent with that approach. And I'm not saying which one's right or wrong, I'm saying you just stay with that. So therefore, train station or some other of the 5 or 6 locations that we've been looking at would be a way of going.
So I mean, I think there's 2 ways to look at this. I think Chris's idea is great to look at the cost of converting all of Avalon versus the cost of building that number of units new. I think maybe another piece of information, sort of the backdoor way of getting to this is what is the town's appetite for new construction and where? Like, how, if the townspeople were like, the only place we'd accept you as the town building affordable housing is the Richmond Hill lot, and the most number of units we could build there in a reasonable form or fashion is 60 units. Did that kind of then answer the question, well, how many then do we need from Avalon? There's 2 ways to get to the same answer.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we pursue them both at the same time, or if we just do the finance piece and then come back and figure out how we make up the difference in number of units building on a greenfield site.
well, it seems to me, you guys tell me what you think, is maybe we need to reactivate, your committee. And we do, seems to me, we try to do both. We reactivate your committee. And I mean, and we pick 1 or 2 sites. And then we reach out to the architect community and we see who's interested on a pro bono basis. I'm spitballing here. you know, of doing a sketch. I mean, there's sketches out there. We know that there's a sketch for the railroad lot for a few people. We take that to the selectmen, and again, you guys tell me whether the selectmen and town council. You know, first level of feedback, it's done in the open. And then, Chris, maybe you could help spearhead, figure out how to do that financial analysis. Maybe we can talk about that.
Yep. Definitely.
I mean, what do you guys think?
I
Yeah,
think,
makes sense.
I think
And
that's the way to go.
we're gonna have a lot of, I know I'm saying this for the 18 millionth time, but some communicating to do with the town because
Yeah.
I think people are starting to think, okay, great, this is over.
Yeah.
And
Yes, it was funny today. I had a conversation with somebody who's very plugged into the town. And I was surprised when he told me, yeah, Avalon, we're done.
I mean, under simple math, it's again, at least everyone is cognizant of the issues, they get the issues, but they don't have anywhere near the depth or the implications. And again, under simple math, you're like, no, you did the whole thing. I mean, best case, I mean, you got 4 years. I mean, Avalon is a 4-year type project or a 4-year moratorium. That's it.
Yeah.
And again, we need that, but what's next?
Oh, that would be a big mistake.
So was that Rick?
I think it'd be a big mistake to put all your eggs in that one basket and then that basket gone. And then how do you sustain that basket? I mean,
Yeah.
people have to understand the implication. You're gonna give tax abatement to all those units? What does that do? I mean,
Yeah.
people, there's an education process to it, but it should be pretty simple to show that that's not a good idea.
Well, and even if it is, there's 2032, there's 2036.
Yeah.
What are you looking toward?
But, and on the public issue, Rick, originally, the route we were originally were going down was to try to have a community forum and have a number of sites, and it's, my thinking has evolved, and, you know, it's just me, you guys tell me, is I'm almost saying to myself now, politically, is it not better to go to the town bodies first? Because I'm gonna make this up, let's say town council says, you know, no. We put too much, you know, support, or we want to define, you know, then.
But
Yeah,
I think
and then we think of, and again, you know, this is all done in public, so, and we all know. This town, like many towns, is you've got maybe 20% of the population that's plugged in, the other 80% just wants to make sure the trains run on time. So yeah, then you will have to go to a bigger public forum, but I mean, what do you?
Yeah, I think under the ordinance that we sprung out of, basically, we owe the town bodies a report, essentially.
Yeah.
So I think it would be not only helpful, but complying with the ordinance to provide them with, okay, here's the math on if we were to convert all, you know, all or part of Avalon, sort of starting with the spreadsheet that you made, or building new. And then we should decide on 3 options of varying size, a small, a medium, and a large, like a lumberyard, a Richmond Hill, and then whatever the state-owned project, you know, something like along those lines. If we built new 20, 30, 100 units, or 20, 50, 100. And I think we present that to the Board of Select. I mean, ultimately, it's sort of an executive decision, and then it's up to Board of Finance and Town Council to decide, well, can we afford to do that? But we would need buy-in from the Board of Selectmen first and foremost, and we have to provide them with a report anyway. So I think something that covers those bases is a good one. Is a really.
so that's
good
the
start.
strategy. It's a strategy decision essentially.
Yeah, and I
They're
think,
making and a leadership decision and then the town gets to weigh in on
yeah, I mean, I think,
the
you
option.
know, it's unfortunately, like, that's what leadership is having to make those kinds of
Yeah.
decisions. And so it's up to our town leader. If we don't have the power to make those decisions, we only have the power to recommend them. So I think to the extent that we can provide a fulsome report that lays out the financial aspects and the sort of, I don't mean this, I'm just picking a word because I'm exhausted, the like doomsday scenario, like people need to be aware that Avalon does not solve our problems for all time. And so that needs to be covered and told very explicitly and simply, like, this is what it gets us by this year. But 2030 sadly is going to be here before we know it. It's already 2025 almost. So I think, you know, we sort of lay out, here's where we are, here's what we've got, and here are our options to go for. This is what we need to do if achieving successive moratoriums is our strategy going forward as a town. Here's what we recommend. I mean, I think that's, to me, it seems like the right route to take.
Query how much detail we need with that, if we're gonna go that step. We had talked about, you know, a public forum where if we used Glenn's company, we would have a couple of schematics. We'd show the massing on each property. If we're going this route to present it to the town, questions might raise, what's it gonna look like? How can we decide? Do we need some detail on that, on what the massing would be at each site and what you might expect or what anticipated?
Yeah, I think we're going to need some help on this.
Yeah.
I do, like I said a little earlier, I do think their architects there would be happy to do drawings, but we need some bigger help than that. You know, Sarah, we need your help. You can't do that whole project, but we need your help. You're the town planner, so we need your help. You're the guy who is, you know,
Gonna own it.
really.
Deserves a vacation.
That was low.
It doesn't necessarily have to be that it's gonna be town owned. You know, there's structures and there's a lot of people that would love to build mixed income housing at this train station in this town.
Yeah.
So, you know, you can leverage what you have. You don't necessarily have to take that whole burden on.
Yeah.
But then it's not gonna be forever affordable.
Exactly.
What do you mean it's not gonna be forever? You write it that way, it'd be forever. Everything I've written basically has been forever affordable.
So you can,
Make it forever. That's it.
So
Oh,
could
well,
we-
forever is as long as the project exists.
Yeah.
If everything gets torn down, but you can do that.
So could we go to one of those folks and just say, this is the parcel? Tell us, you know, give us a proposal, tell us what it would cost. They do
Well, I
it
think,
at a high level,
again,
in terms of allocating the work.
yeah, waving a magic wand, I think getting the buy-in, you have to know, can we build above parking? You keep all your parking, we're gonna build above it. Answer, you know, is that okay? Let's get that answer first. And then as far as at what density, at what height, at what ratio of, you know, I mean, that's a whole nother longer process. But you first have to know, are they even into doing anything with it? And when you pass that test, then you can go to the next one and say, yeah, okay, first of all, it's gonna be stick built. It can't be more than 3 or 4 stories, whichever one. You know, what's the parking ratio that you're gonna tolerate at the train station that can share off peak at night? What is that? That's, yeah, every parking space is, pick a number. If it's structured, $40,000. So, you know, you can layer in these things without spending a lot of time, money, and effort, because the other piece of this, you talk about leadership, when's the next election?
Next year.
So,
November.
I mean, what happens then? So you need to time it so that whatever green lights you get, they can't be red lighted later. Because otherwise, you're gonna waste a lot of time, money, and effort and discourage people from wanting to do what you want to do. And then you're back to on your own. Then you're on your own.
And having seen some of these things, like for the police station, sort of like, okay, well, what would you pay for this? And you're like, well, what would you let me do?
Yeah.
And if the answer is only exactly what's under the books, I mean, the police station came down to, it's like, well, if you paid me a lot of money, I'd take it off your hands. But if you went ahead and said, well, we'll do this extra parking, we'll let you do this, you can go higher, you can move over here, then all of a sudden it becomes something of value. And I think certainly for the train station, you know, the parking is a huge part of this. And then what will you allow and how many units of what type of housing is a big deal. And then people can take it seriously and actually, you know, start coming out with some money and saying, okay, it's worth $30-40 million to me to do that. Or maybe if we want more affordable housing, maybe it's like, okay, I'll do the deal for you and I'll provide
Exactly.
this amount of housing.
Exactly.
I don't know.
Right. You can leverage it any way you want, right? Including, depending if you want to do more, I mean, think about how the deal went. If you want, because the value is there, you could have you know, if you want them to pay, then you can pay down some of your bonds or something, and then you can increase the affordability there. So that everything's gonna interact with what you're doing. Everything from now on is gonna interact.
Rick, have you, I mean, I'm sure I could just Google it, but have you seen examples of,
Exactly.
I know these RFPs exist, I've not worked on them in affordable housing, I've looked on them in other capacities in government, but do you have any examples of RFPs like this where municipalities provided the land and asked for, well, I mean, I'm sure even town hall probably has some of these, I know. Pine Cottage, but
Stanford did one on on Glenbrook, you know,
Yeah, my old alma mater. The Glenbrook Community Center, yeah, the old
and
elementary
it
school.
ended up failing through politics,
Right,
but there was successful bidders, a detailed RFP.
was it for housing?
That was a town, it
yeah,
was gonna be for affordable housing.
yeah,
Okay.
and historic preservation.
I just think it'd be good for us to see a couple examples of what variables get negotiated. I mean, I think pretty much any variable can be negotiated through this, but what kind of standard is
Right,
done?
right. Well, I'm sure there's documents on that particular deal and to look at. But ultimately, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and it sounds like you're gonna go through a process because there's gonna be competing interests of what should be there and how much should be affordable and what size units and what's that impact of the schools and, you know, but you're gonna have to try to reach somewhat of a consensus so that you know what you're going out with the RFP for. You know, again, you can reverse it and say, we're gonna make this available. All you have to do is replace all our parking and give us your proposal, and we want X amount of affordable housing as a minimum. And we're gonna score your points on design and, you know, you're gonna create some criteria for all of that. And yeah, I'm sure there's a way to do that.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Easier to do one right than it is to throw out 4 different options and talk about them all. Because people don't pay attention until it's their backyard. And the train
And then they
station
do.
is everybody's backyard. All these numbers, what's happening with the 3830G in terms of the numbers? Are they in there? I didn't.
So those are separate calculations that I have those numbers, but they weren't presented.
And we're,
Yeah.
just based upon the status of those 3830Gs, we're going to stay away from that for now.
Okay, but I mean, you.
We're not, this is not the body that is in litigation on the 830G.
No, I understand, but I'm thinking, you know, I put myself, I live in a community, I'm home, I want to know, you know, I want these numbers, how much is it going to cost, what are my taxes going to happen? And that's sort of like the elephant that's missing in the room,
Right.
you know, because wait a second, if all those happen, then maybe we don't have to do anything with the train station. So it's got to be part of the conversation. You got to just know the facts.
Yeah.
If you lose them all, you win them all. Those are,
We have.
they're simple
I have
facts.
provided them
Yeah,
at one point.
yeah.
Yeah,
to you all,
okay, I was
yeah.
just
Yeah.
curious.
And
why-
that should either be
yeah.
incorporated, or by the time we get some report together, that it will be submitted to the relevant town bodies, we will have some clarity on that, maybe perhaps.
Hopefully.
Maybe.
But which,
I mean, I think we put it in as a hypothetical if we're drafting, starting tomorrow, for instance, but then we might get clarity because just as time goes on and we haven't submitted a report. I mean, we're gonna get into budget season with Board of Selectmen and everybody starting in January. So I don't know what the appetite would be to digest a report like this. So we have a little bit of time, I would say.
When do you think a good time frame would be, Hillary, to target after budget
Like
season?
April 1st, right? What do you think?
Maybe a little late, because like.
Yeah.
Not April
Like-
1st, not
No.
April.
No, May 1st, maybe May. Maybe May. And then there's like summer to chew on it. But for sure after budget season, because everybody will be laser focused on it. And we have a lot of meetings and
Yeah, I'll be busy.
it'll be really busy for January, February, and into March. Town council doesn't vote until like end of March.
And I'm gonna circle back to the school thing. I mean, we obviously have our enrollments maintained because of our excellence of our school district. So that we haven't had that drop off in attrition that has been experienced in some other parts of Connecticut. So, I mean, that's another thing. So it's not that it's not a factor because, you know, it's sort of in an imbalance right now in terms of the stress on an
Yeah.
east versus south versus west. So I mean, those are all part of the
And I-
larger calculus of it all.
I think enrollments in elementary school there's like 40 additional than what they had anticipated. Perhaps, I might be misspeaking, but I think it's actually larger than what had been estimated. So we're about to hit a real enrollment boom. And so there's gonna have to.
This was gonna be this
Yes.
was the COVID year anyway.
Correct,
On
yes.
top of everything else, yeah.
So I think it's a worthy discussion, but again, that Board of Ed's gonna have to make some decisions about that too. I mean, whether it's redistricting or trying to find a site for another elementary school or something, I don't know. I know. But so I think it's a factor that we have to consider, and I think to your point, Bill, maybe that's the point where we're like being strategic about what site we would recommend so that it isn't impacting East, which is bursting at the seams right now, as it is. So I think that's a fair and valid point.
Yeah, I think the fact that we lose that, there's 20% turnover there has to be because there's people moving into town, you know, moving in there, paying a year's rent, then while they're constructing the house and then moving out. So, you know, the demographics, that whole thing's gonna change, including the number of children and so on.
There's a lot of kids there now. There's a lot
Well,
of,
like kids.
yeah, there's a lot of kids that live there. I think the amenities make it an attractive place, whether you're renovating or, you know, like you said, or down, I don't know, there's all sorts of
There's a
reasons.
lot of different things, yeah.
There's a lot
Young
of different
families who
living
come to
yes.
town can't afford to buy yet, but are getting to know the
Yeah.
community, so it's an entry point into the town.
Totally. Yeah.
If you're doing something new and at the train station and the political issue is the schools, don't allow 3 bedrooms. Don't, you know, I mean, there are things you can do to still encourage the diversity of housing and not get on that third rail. Because you get on that third rail and you're not going to get anything.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not on the agenda, but I think I'll be shot if I don't say this. Would anybody from the public like to address this committee? Anybody on Zoom? Yes, echo what everybody just said. Sarah, Scott, Rick, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Do I have a motion for adjournment?
Move.
Good. Thank you, guys.
Thank you. It's amazing.
No, so my kids will not. So that will be like sitting on the couch watching that.
Oh, it was
Well,
like-
Peter went to play paddle
Very
tennis, so we left
lucky.
both home and I was like, you're going to bed at 8:30. So at 8:30, I was like, please go to bed. And like, I'm sure they will not.
You're so lucky.
Yeah, having Chuck Berman available to go ahead and solve.
Before he became a developer, worked for me.
There we go. So David was integrated in the whole process. He was involved in all.